Hey everyone, my name is Derek Jesko, and I am a second-year graduate student in the Clinical Counseling, Marriage, and Family Therapy program here at Hardin-Simmons, and today we're going to talk about personality theory and assessment. Now, just so you know, this presentation was originally around 100 or so slides, and I am being asked to condense that into a 15-minute voiceover, so forgive me, but I'm going to try to be as minimal as possible with my explanations of things. And I'm going to move fairly fast, so feel free to pause to read some of the slides, because you're probably going to need the extra time to do so. So, the three main models that we're going to go over are the Big Five, the Hexaco, the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, or MBTI, and the Enneagram. So let's start off with the Big Five. So the Big Five has the most significant body of supporting literature in the modern day, and this typology seeks to determine the relationship between academic behaviors, learning styles, job performance and work success, and satisfaction in romantic relationships. So the Big Five is a trait theory, and that means that it seeks to determine one's temperament and behavior through the lens of individual traits that person has. Now this is scaled on a range, meaning you can be high in one trait and low in another trait and then average in another trait, and that's okay, that's totally normal. So the Big Five and the Hexaco, these are the traits that each type is measuring for each individual, either high, average, or low in all of these traits. So starting off with the first trait, openness, I have included some terms that can be associated with this trait up at the top. They're italicized, and then a few terms that can be used to describe those that tend to be low and then those that tend to be high in openness. And then to further assist you in conceptualizing what this trait looks like, I've included two movie characters after each trait that kind of embody the high end and the low end of each trait. So for openness, we have high in openness, we have Willy Wonka from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and then low in openness, we have Bilbo Baggins from the Hobbit trilogy. So conscientiousness, which you can see once again, I have a couple terms at the top that are associated with openness, trait openness, and then we have some terms that are used to describe those that are high in this trait and then those that are low in this trait. So for this trait, we have Hermione Granger on the high end and Dale Denton on the low end. So extroversion. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this trait. It's a little bit different than the traditional understanding of extroversion. It's also associated with sociability as normal, but also associated with emotional expressiveness, assertiveness, and excitability. So, on the high end, we have Harley Quinn from the Suicide Squad, and on the low end, we have Severus Snape. Hexaco and Big Five trait, agreeableness. So agreeableness, as you can see, trust, kindness, affection, prosocial behaviors. Prosocial behaviors just meaning that you are acting on behalf of the tribe or the whole or the community. And then the characters for this trait are Samwise Gamgee on the high end and Jordan Belfort on the low end. Okay, neuroticism. Normally associated with sadness, emotional instability, and moodiness. So neuroticism is basically how likely you are to experience negative emotions in both consistency and degree. So do you experience negative emotions a lot? And when you do experience them, do they really get to you? You're mostly high in neuroticism. Not so much, then you're probably low. Here's some characters. At the high end, Sansa Stark, the low end, Yoda. So the last trait that is only found within the Hexaco model is honesty and humility. Some terms to describe this trait. On the high end, we have Katniss Everdeen, and then on the low end, we have Joffrey Baratheon. Alright, so now let's move on to the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. So the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, also known as the MBTI, sometimes referred to as the 16 personalities or the 16 archetypes, was actually originally developed in the 1920s by a psychoanalyst and student of Freud named Carl Gustav Jung. Now, his version of the MBTI is far more complicated, and it's kind of the source material for what eventually became the MBTI, because as you can see in the 1940s, the original source material of the MBTI was adapted by Isabel Briggs Myers and her mother, Catherine Briggs, and they were seeking to make this personality typology a bit more readily accessible to the public and a bit easier to understand, because as I said previously, the original source material was far more complicated. Now, unlike the previous model, unlike the Big Five model, this personality typology seeks to determine overall type, not just individual traits. It's a self-report questionnaire, and as you can see, those are some of the preferences that this typology likes to try to determine. And this typology groups everyone into 4 major groups. As you can see the terms down there, the traditionalists, the creators, the idealists, and the intellectuals. So here's some examples of what the traditionalist type looks like. It's the SJ types, making up 40% of the population. Next up, the creator types, with 30% of the population. The idealist types, with 15% of the population. And the intellectual types, also with 15% of the population. So problems with the MBTI and just general self-reporting measures. The MBTI has shown to have very poor reliability, meaning that the same person could take the same assessment on different days, under different circumstances and in different moods, and get drastically different results. Along with this, you have to take into consideration the Barnum-Forer effect, which is definitely in effect in this typology. And this is basically the identification with traits or personal descriptions that are perceived to be highly individualized, but in all reality are actually pretty vague and general enough to apply to most people taking the assessment. And you see this phenomenon in things like the horoscope, in fortune telling, and then also, obviously, in some personality tests. Along with this, as I mentioned previously, the MBTI seeks to simplify the necessary complexity of the source material. It's really complex and deep for a reason, and that's because humans are deep and complex. So when you simplify the source material and try to make it more widely accessible, you kind of generalize it, and it's applicable to a wider variety of individuals and isn't as pointed and personalized in its approach. And in trying to adapt the source material, a lot of things get lost in translation. The letters are very misleading. So as you can see, just based on the letters, we have the ESFJ and the ENTJ, and in theory you would think, yeah, those types are actually probably pretty similar. But in all reality, those two types are the exact polar opposite of one another. The same with the INTP and the ISFP. So, let's break down the source material of the MBTI, which is Jungian cognitive functions. Now, the first type of cognitive function is a perceiving or a gathering function, and this is sensing or intuition, so the S or the N in your 4-letter stack. And then we have the judging or the deciding functions, which is the thinking and feeling, and the T or the F in your stack. So perceiving functions, sensing or intuition, is basically how we gather information from the world around us. And then the judging functions, thinking or feeling, is the meaning that we attach to the observations, or what we do based on the information that we've gathered, how we make decisions. So let's break it down a little bit more. Sensing is gaining information directly from the physical world, 5 senses. They're concerned with the what is, whereas intuition gains information from the unseen, from patterns that they're picking up from the environment and the interconnectedness of things. They're concerned with the what if. That takes care of the N and the S. So let's get to the T and the F. So the judging functions, thinking and feeling. Thinking is making decisions based on a system of logic, based on what is true and false. Whereas feeling, though mistakenly normally associated with emotions, is not quite associated with emotions. It's more associated with personal systems of value. What you deem to be good and what you deem to be bad, as opposed to what is true or false, logical, that you would find in thinking. So feeling is concerned with what is right and wrong and good and bad. So that takes care of the N and the T and the INTP and the S and the F and the ESFJ. So the introverted and extroverted orientation is a concept that I'm sure you're familiar with, so I'm not really going to go over it. I'm just going to give you time to read over the slide. And moving on, so that takes care of the I and the E. So a cognitive function, as you can see, is a judging or a perceiving function. So a T or an F in the judging, or an S or an N in the perceiving, and an introverted or an extroverted orientation. That's what makes a cognitive function. So we have perception, decision-making, attitude, and temperament down. Let's talk about, lastly, one's general approach to life, which is determined by preference toward judging or a preference toward perceiving. Okay, so judging are individuals that are very structure and organization oriented. They tend to plan ahead, and they are decider types, whereas perceivers are open to possibility, they like to improvise, and they are more observers of the environment rather than deciders. So that takes care of all the letters. So, just to recap, once again, judging a perceiving function plus an introverted extroverted orientation is a cognitive function. And just so you know, there's a lot more to this than I'm able to go over in this short recap of the presentation, but at the end I will provide you with some resources if you're interested in exploring this further. So the Enneagram. This is the symbol that's normally associated with the Enneagram. So, the previous assessments seek to determine type and trait and tendencies, behaviors, and preferences, but it also instilled a sense of identification with a personality type, with a combination of letters, and therefore a sense of separation with all the other personality types or combinations of letters. The Enneagram is a bit more holistic and experiential in its approach, and it prioritizes transcendence of one's personality type over identification with one's personality type. Another interesting thing about this personality typology is that it includes levels of development for each personality type. So if you research the Enneagram further, you'll find that for each number or each type, there are levels of development, healthy, average, and unhealthy for each type, that can kind of give you a roadmap to help you determine where you are and where you could be. So let's talk about for the Enneagram, we're just going to go over the basic fear, the basic desire, the stress and integration, or disintegration, and the growth and integration state for each type. So again, here's the symbol. So starting off with the 1, the reformer. Now, what's interesting about the Enneagram, as you can see on the right, the 1 is connected to both the 7 and the 4. And what this means is, and this is the same for each type, is that the 1 begins to embody the healthy traits of the 7 when they are in their growth state, and then begins to embody the unhealthy characteristics of the 4 in their stress state. And there's some descriptive terms for the type 1 that I'll just let you read. So the 2, as you can see, the same. Stress state, they go to the 8. Growth state, they go to the 4. There's the 3. And the 4. And the 5. The 6. The 7. The 8. And the 9. So I have a typo down at the bottom in the growth state. It's actually supposed to say 3. Okay, so that's basically it. Again, like I said, very short overview of these typologies, but if you're interested in further exploring them, here are some resources for you. There's some YouTube channels if you prefer watching videos. And yeah, that's it. Appreciate your time, and I hope that you found this interesting and helpful in some way. Thanks.